have a very special guest with us today here on Drum Channel. It's known not only to the drumming community, you guys out there and you non-drummers out there too, but everybody in the world, think I almost now, Antonio Sanchez. Thank you for joining us so much here on Drum Channel.
Thank you so much for having me, Don.
I have a quote from Jim Keltner, hot off the press exactly. It says, he's a beautiful player. Then he further said, Antonio and Terry together, hope they collaborate on a film or anything. Well, if you take a look at what's behind us a little bit, you'll see the anything is coming up pretty soon because they're going to be playing together. I think I first became aware of you with Pat Metheny. Mm-hmm. That would have been one of the first, most popular things you did back. What years were that? That was back in the...
I started playing with him in 2001.
Okay, yeah, that sounds about right,
It's been a while, yeah.
Obviously, your success with Birdman is another big part of your life. Terry Bozzio is going to be interviewing also, and you'll be getting into a lot of the particulars, I think, of how that all came together, which is neat. But I thought what we talk about here a little bit more is with all these opportunities that came up, whether there were, it'd be interesting to know whether there were auditions involved or the bass player recommended you or another friend said there's going to be an opening in the band, the opportunity came up for the movie. You were prepared for that. What would you have to say to the young drummers out there to get them prepared in their life's journey of wanting to be a musician?
Well, first thing I would say is you really, really have to love what you do. Because, if you have any doubt in your head that, okay, if this doesn't pan out the way I want it, maybe I should do something else, that I'm pretty sure it's not going to happen the way you want it to happen. I think for people that have any amount of success, what usually happens is that you are so obsessed and in love with what you're doing that you just can't think of anything else. And success, you can measure it in a bunch of different ways, A lot of people think success is, doing a huge tour in, all stadiums or, having a yacht or, or a fancy car. I think success as a musician is to be able to live off of what you do and be creative and be able to, show your gift and share your gift with other people, because it really is a gift to be able to do what we do and present it out there. But in terms of just preparedness, what I always thought was very important for me, and this was just because I always afraid of making a fool out of myself in front of people. So my policy was like, I have to be overly prepared for anything. If it's just one little gig or it's a, big concert with a big band, I want to be over prepared. And so that I don't have to sweat the things that can make you nervous during a performance, which would be, sight reading or not knowing the music well enough, that kind of stuff. I always wanted to be incredibly well prepared. And another thing that I found that is such a thing that will shape how your career is going to end up is attitude. And a lot of people, I don't think they take that into consideration. Okay, if I can play really well, things are going to happen. But that's not the only thing, because, for example, if you are, a drummer here in Oxnard, you can be the best drummer in Oxnard. But then, of course, there's LA, then there's the West Coast, then there's the whole States, then there's the whole world. So, my point is you have to stop worrying so much about comparing yourselves to other people and just really focus on being the best you can be. Of course, it's a very competitive world and it's good to check other people out, but I think sometimes it's good to be a little bit like this so that you can do what you need to do without being so worried about what everybody else is doing, especially nowadays in the age of social media where people are basically documenting their whole life 24 hours a day. And that can be really overwhelming. So a lot of times when I'm not feeling very secure about myself, I just don't go into social media and look at stuff. I just, focus on things that I know are going to enrich me as a human being, which is, to eat well, to work out, to practice a lot, to listen to music, to read, things that will make you be back in touch with yourself. Because this is so easy to do nowadays, and I feel like that's very distracting, and it makes people way more stressful and way more anxious, So I think it's a good thing to stay away from those things and try to concentrate on things that will enrich you as a person. And the attitude thing, like, for example, I arrived here early and, I've been dealing with people all day. So it's a people's business. So how you treat people, how people treat you and how you treat them back, I think has huge consequences on how people are going to perceive you and how likely they're going to be to call you to do something, maybe go on tour. Well, if you have a bad attitude, and you're thinking, oh, I'm going to be stuck on the road a month with this person, probably not. So just to be a nice all-around person really, really goes a long way.
And even at this point in your career, am I hearing you still have some of these concerns about being overly prepared, getting ready for something? I just say that because I know we have a lot of great drummers here on the Drum Channel crew who are graduates of college, played in the A bands, and they were so stoked that you were coming. It was like, you can do no wrong.
Oh, I can do very wrong, believe me.
Not in their minds.
I have. No, well, I'm just going to tell you this little anecdote because I thought it was something so deep that I witnessed that I was like, okay, I have to rethink how I think about music and about myself within the music. So I was doing Michael Brecker's album, Wide Angles. For those who don't know, Michael passed away already, a few years ago, but he was one of the most influential saxophone players in the last, the 50 years or so. I mean, basically after Coltrane, he revamped, in his own way, how to play the saxophone. And I was doing this recording with him. It was his album. And it was, like a funky groove and he used to kill those things. So it was just kind of a vamp. And then he came in and just played the most ridiculous Michael Brecker classic solos. And I just remember being so stoked just to hear my drums and his saxophone, which I heard his saxophone so many times, but just to hear the saxophone like this with my drums, it was just such a delight, and I was just like, oh my God, this is the coolest thing. And we were in the control room and we're listening to one of the takes. And, he sounds incredible, like he always did. And I'm like this, I'm like, man, this is one of the coolest things ever. And then all of a sudden he starts, and it's his solo that we're listening to, and he's like, you can see him just getting darker and darker until he actually put his hands on his face, slumped down, and then said something to the sound engineer. And all of a sudden, the sound engineer just turned off the saxophone, which meant that he just could not stand hearing to himself. So, after that, I was like, okay, if Michael Brecker doesn't like what he played, who am I to ever like what I play? So I'm very critical of what I do. And I think nowadays you have to be. There's so much great talent out there. There's so many great drummers nowadays. I think it's a great time for drummers and percussion players.
Probably more than other instruments. I think drummers are always learning. I mean, today was a great opportunity. You didn't know you were going to be running into Efren Toro, and right away it's like you're in the middle of.
Oh, it's a clinic.
It's a clinic, right.
Yeah, no, it's amazing, and I think one very cool thing about drums is that it just goes all over the spectrum of modern music. Because saxophone, you're not going to find saxophone in a lot of instances, but drums, it's always there. So I think the community, the drumming community, and how we admire people in other genres and how they admire you back is really something beautiful, I think.
Drumming, as a musician, thinking of it beyond what people would think of as drummers, you become a really good drummer. On Drum Channel, we have this thing we talk about a lot, which is how you play, which is how your body motivates two pieces of wood so it can do anything your mind tells it to do. And then what you play would be looking and copying, as all young drummers do, other drummers. And then it's why you play it, which that becomes a little bit of the secret ingredient, or even more importantly, why you don't play it sometimes.
Right.
And your experiences, education, you went to Berklee. What is your background and how much you would encourage young drummers to seek out, one, a private instructor, which we're a big opponent of here, or getting a higher education? In your experiences, education, you went to Berklee. What is your background and how much you would encourage young drummers to seek out, one, a private instructor, which we're a big opponent of here, or getting a higher education?
Well, I started playing drums when I was 5 in Mexico because my mother, Susana, she is still a music lover, and I would listen to everything she listened to. But I was more into rock for a long time, and then slowly I started getting into jazz because my rock bands didn't really quite work out, and I just didn't want to get better. I wanted to get better so that I could play with a bunch of different people, and then. I saw the movie Amadeus, by Milos Forman, and that movie just blew me away. Just to, even though it's very whimsical in a way, just to see the genius of Mozart really kind of did something to me. So immediately I wanted to learn classical music. So I enrolled in the conservatory in Mexico City to study classical piano and classical composition. So without really putting too much thought into it, that really opened my ears quite a bit and gave me a really good sense of composition because I was really studying Mozart and Bach, Beethoven, Debussy, all the great composers and great piano players. And to analyze their compositions was incredibly helpful, just to see the shape, the form, how they would develop motifs, and how they would tell a story. So to me, that has become one of the most important things, storytelling. And when I got to Berklee after that, I was still very fresh from Mexico, and I was really into chops and not really having much of a concept besides playing fast. And that worked with some drummers and in some kinds of music, but for the most part, I was running into a brick wall constantly because nobody was calling me, and I didn't understand why. And I could see other drummers at Berklee that just played with a bass drum and a snare drum, a hi-hat and a ride cymbal that everybody was freaking out about them. I was like, why? Why? And I just didn't get it yet. And I had a really horrible and great experience my first semester where my teacher, Ron Savage, who back then I didn't know him, but he saw me and was like, hey man, I have an 8-semester bebop advanced ensemble and the drummer didn't show up. Do you want to play? And I'm like, yeah, of course. This is my first semester. So I thought I'm going to skip over the next 7 semesters. It's going to be great. And I was into fusion back then, so I had a big kit with a bunch of cymbals, and I set the whole thing up, and we started playing bebop. And I knew bebop was like fast ding 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 ding, but that's all I really knew. And I had my double bass drum pedal. And to make a long story short, Ron started basically removing every piece of my kit until he left me just with bass drum, hi-hat, snare drum, and ride cymbal. And then he said, okay, play, now solo. And, needless to say, I was it was a horrible experience for that to happen in front of these kids. But it was also, I think, the beginning of me really trying to understand what playing music meant, versus playing drums. I was very focused on patterns and licks and my technique, and I was not really focusing on trying to tell a story every time I play. It doesn't matter if it's one drum or if it's 20 drums. Terry can play with all that stuff and he always tells a story, but you can also play with just a single snare drum with brushes and tell a beautiful story as well. So I started really trying to focus on that, listening to really good storytellers like Miles Davis. He's one of the best in my opinion. And then started working with Pat Metheny and Gary Burton, Chick Corea.
You worked with them, and storytellers, right?
Exactly. So, like, they would play a solo, and then it was my turn to play a solo. Of course, if you don't come up to that level, then you're gonna sink. So, just to be put into those situations was incredibly lucky for me. But I think even people that don't have the opportunity to play with great musicians, you can have that frame of mind of every time I'm going to sit down, I'm going to tell a story, because that's what makes, I think, the biggest difference between just a very competent player and an artist. Artists really can tell you what they want to say in the moment in a way that people just listen. There's other great musicians that can play a lot of notes and never make a mistake, and yet they never say anything, anything beyond what they're usually capable of doing. They don't make stuff up in the moment, and to me, that's key. To be able to come up with something in the moment and tell it beautifully. To me, that's art.
Now, this is so great, because one of the things on Drum Channel that I've often said is you can get better lessons by listening to a gentleman like this and learn a lot more. Replay this again and listen closely. And when you hear Antonio play, listen to what is think drumnistically if you want to look at how you can produce what he's doing and how he's doing it, but think musically and see how it is a song. Exactly. It has a melody. It has. I can see why Birdman. The background, that answers my question. How did you get a background to do these things? Well, it was your classical training that allowed you to do that. A drummer without that would have been lost in that circumstance, I would think.
Yeah, I can't tell for sure, but I know that helped, definitely. And it also helped that I did a lot of just research on my own on the drums, just see what sounds you can get, play. Because a lot of times, I think people are just so used to making the same sounds that most people make that you don't experiment with other sounds. So I think it's really cool when you just grab a cymbal and a stick and see what you can do with that cymbal. Scratch it this way or hit him, just to get a different view of the same instrument that you see every day. So all of a sudden you are, watching somebody play and then they hit the cymbal a different way and everybody freaks out like, oh my God, it's a different sound from the same thing. So I encourage drummers to always, just try to find what they can do with the same instrument they deal with on a daily basis. What are the sounds you can get?
You have that here on your kit too, several different tone colors. So one of the big lessons at Berklee when you went to semester 8 is you realized why there was a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, right?
Absolutely. I always say that having a lot of technique without a concept is like giving a machine gun to a 5-year-old. It's a powerful weapon. It can do a lot of damage. So, you have to know what to do with that technique, because if you don't know, then you're going to end up hurting the music and hurting the band in a bad way. And your reputation on the way.
Another thing we encourage a lot of young drummers here, we had a round table not too long ago with Jim Keltner and Doan Perry and Neil Peart. And the theme of the round table was drummers who compose. So the subject wasn't like, how do you compose, as much as how does your ability to be able to compose affect when you sit behind the drum set? And those three were interesting because Jim does it mostly off of sounds. He hears the different tonalities, and we'll build melodies off around that. Neil, of course, is the lyrics, and Doan was more traditional. I'll sit at a piano and I'll work out, and then I'll bring the rhythm into it, later. But your experience as a piano player and the ability for young drummers to go beyond the boundaries of just learning how to play the drums and learn other instruments. How important do you think that would be for them, or has it been for you?
I really can't stress enough how important it is for you to learn piano. I mean, you can learn any other instrument you like, but I think piano, even guitar players, they compose on piano a lot of times because it's so graphic and it's just so much easier to play. When I went to Berklee, they used to make you do vibraphone, as a harmonic instrument, which I thought was insane. First of all, who has a vibraphone just around to practice? And then how hard it is to play a chord on whereas in a keyboard, even with this 4 fingers, you can play a nice chord. So I think it's incredibly important just to open your ears, and it's so useful in so many different things, not only for composing, which that's what I use now for composing, but for example, a lot of times when I would get lost reading a chart, if I wouldn't have taken piano and I didn't know chord qualities, minor, major, minor, augmented, diminished, just, you don't need to be able to hear much, but if you're able to hear a little bit of the chord quality and the bass movement, for example, if I would get lost, then if you have the chords written down on the chart, a lot of times I would just be like, okay, I know this is a fourth, or this is a minor second. And then I would hear the minor second and like, okay, here we are. Whereas if it's just a drum chart with nothing in it, if you get lost, it's really easy to not be able to get back. So I really can't stress enough how important it is to be able to play a keyboard or a piano.
And learn how to read.
Yes.
Obviously, as a drummer at whatever level you might be at.
Yeah, definitely. Being a jazz musician, a lot of times you don't have time for rehearsal. So a lot of times I would go into the studio and just record really hard music, try to sight read it and interpret it. And it's different than a jingle because you have to do this and do it really well. But here you really have to come up with different things and shape it in a different way and make it playful for everybody. So that was always a great experience to try to do that with original music, especially because jazz musicians tend to play a lot of standards, and there's always a preconceived notion of how you're supposed to play a standard, even if you play it differently. But playing original music, you're the first one to sink your teeth into that piece of music, and that's really helpful to just kind of widen your parameters and creativity, I think.
I was recently with an amateur drummer. Actually, he was a race car driver, won the Indianapolis 500. Will Power recently, and he had asked a question. He heard a lot about jazz drummers who became rock drummers. Charlie Watts, a long list of great rock drummers have a jazz background, a jazz influence. And we were talking a little bit about what is the difference? Why is that helping them when they play rock? And my answer was it has to do with the feeling of the time. The way they're interpreting a straight eighth note is going to be a little bit different because they have like a looser feel to it, kind of. But coming to the question, jazz as a background for a lot of young drummers, it's like, I don't play jazz. I'm a rock guy. But to have the background of not playing jazz because you have to play a jazz standard, but understanding the feeling of what goes into that type of music. What would you say is the importance of somebody learning all genres? What would you say is the importance of somebody learning all genres.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. That not only jazz and rock. I mean, everything in between. Vinny, of course, has been a big influence my whole life, and I used to see his name on so many recordings, sounding so differently, that I was like, I want to do that. So for a while, I wanted to be the most versatile drummer on the planet, and I used to really try to play Brazilian music with Brazilian people, and Cuban music with Cubans, and jazz with Americans, and I tried to get to the roots of everything. And then, of course, I realized that people are so specialized that it was going to be really hard to be the best reggae drummer when somebody was born doing that. But I did learn it anyway, and that comes really, really handy when you're playing, like I was saying, especially original music, because you'll have this huge toolbox that will allow you to interpret music in a bunch of different ways. And it's very useful to know, okay, this is the Bonham feel, and this is the Neil Peart feel, and same thing with the right cymbal. This is the Roy Haynes feel, and this is the Elvin Jones feel, and that just makes your vocabulary just be so vast that you can interpret things in a beautiful way. And I think that's the purpose of it. Especially as drummers that are part of the rhythm section that really need to know a lot about styles and genres.
It's got to be rewarding for you at this point in your career for the last many years that when people are calling you, it's not because they want a drummer, it's because they want you. And that's quite a compliment. It's what you bring to what you're doing. They know that you're able and capable of doing all these things, and the feeling that you put into it. Doing the movie soundtrack was probably a huge leap of faith by the people who hired you to do that.
Definitely.
One had never been done before that I know of. And I think one of the ultimate compliments, and I mentioned this to several people, in fact, Terry Bozzio recently said the same thing. I was halfway through the movie when I leaned to Bonnie next to me. I said, I think it's all drums. And
you thought it was just a fluke in the beginning.
For the first, it sounded so musical. I didn't even think of it being drums because there was so many soundscapes and so many different ways that you approach that. But in talking with you, I can see where your background all would have brought that into your thinking pattern of how that would work.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I was petrified of doing this thing because,
I'm sure.
First when I read the script, I thought it was incredibly weird. And then you're going to put drums on top of this? I thought people were going to hate me forever. But I had a lot of faith in Iñárritu, with the director, who's a genius.
Sure.
So I kept thinking, just trust him. Just trust him.
I think I read at one point, I didn't understand why this happened, because I know the great musicians that come in here who do soundtracks, the movie's pretty much done, and then they're sometimes playing to it, or they're literally playing to what people know is going to be happening to the movie. But was the movie finished before you did the soundtrack, or did you actually?
No, actually, one of the first things we did was get together in a studio in New York and worked off of the script.
Just the script?
Just the script. So he would explain the scenes in great detail to me, and then just have me improvise based on that. And I told him, since I don't know the scenes very well, can you sit in front of me so that I get the timing right that you have in your head? Let's imagine the scene together, and then when you see the next phase of the scene, just raise your hand so that I know that, okay, he opened the door, whatever, So I would be watching him, and then I would see him do that, and remembering what he had just told me about the scene, then I would change the vibe, go into a different thing. And, we just did the whole movie like that in the beginning. And then they grabbed those demos and then superimposed them on the rough cut of the film. And then they showed me what they did, and then I redid everything. Just really taking now, being very objective about dialogue and movement and the things that he liked a lot, some of the things that he didn't like. And one of the things he didn't like about the first batch of demos was the sound of the drums, because the drums sound really good. The demos were my drum sounded really nice in the studio.
Sound like a drum set.
Yeah. And he's like, this movie happens in the bowels of an old Broadway theater, so it would be great if the drum sounded like they've been in storage for 50 years,
Funkier, yeah.
Yeah. So then I had to put tape and detune and, try all sorts of different things. And he was like, yeah, that sounds good. Yeah.
It's beautiful because the essence of what you're saying is exactly what I have heard from, whether it's on a movie score or if you're just doing a session. What you brought to that by seeing what he was doing and giving him what he wanted is what you would do if you were playing what Hal Blaine did all of his life.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, music is first, then the band leader, second, you're third. I mean, if you want to get on the bandstand and immediately satisfy your ego and your instincts, a lot of times those are not the right choices. And it's very important when you start thinking musically, you can really be satisfied by playing the simplest stuff. If you're thinking drums, then you're always going to be bored. That way. So I think it's very important to make that switch in your mindset from drums to just music.
Another lesson. So many words of wisdom you're giving us here today. I really appreciate that so much.
I've learned by making a bunch of mistakes.
Terry's going to get into a conversation with you, which you can see here on Drum Channel as part of the Art of Drumming show, about you doing the soundtrack and the fact that it was all drums, and that was a bit of an issue with getting an award. So that's something we talk about here a lot, is just like, give the drummer some love here, come on. So Stuart Copeland did a clinic for us recently, and at the end, and he said, and if you're doing a session or playing on a track and you're the drummer, just scream at the end. Do whatever you can to get your voice on.
That's good advice.
I learned that later in life, he said. Your recent band, you're basically in the middle of a tour now, visiting us. I think you have a few days off, but you're heading to Vegas shortly.
We're starting the day after tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah, in Las Vegas.
And it's Migration, and who's in that
Migration. On saxophone, there's a great young saxophone player named Chase Bayard. He plays saxophone and iwi, electronic wind instrument, that also Michael Brecker was an amazing, he really kind of made the instrument be visible for a long time. Then my wife, Tana Alexa, she's on vocals and effects, and she uses a bunch of pedals and stuff, which is awesome because she's almost like a synthesizer as well, and sometimes. And then on piano, John Escreet from England, and piano and Fender Rhodes, and on bass, Orlando LaFleming, also from England. And everybody has pedals and electronics and. This last record that I put out, it's called Lines in the Sand. The first tune is 25 minutes, the last tune is 26 minutes, I think. So it all goes back to the storytelling thing, which, because I love cinema, and of course Birdman was a very deep experience in my life. I've been really wanting to bring people into my narrative, and I find it sometimes it's easier to bring them in and stay in when it's a longer experience. Sometimes when you're just doing, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and then take a break, talk, it's harder to get into it. It's like watching a bunch of shorts, in the movie theater instead of a 2-hour feature film. So, I really love trying to get people to come into the journey, what we're doing, and it allows you to kind of experiment with your characters and develop them in a much better or more profound way than if you're trying to develop all these characters in 5 minutes. You know, so melodies that were heard in the beginning, then they're heard in a different way in the middle, and then with different harmony and a different tempo. So it's exactly what classical musicians would do. You know, they would have movements, and then they would bring back elements, which are the characters in this case, and that way, you know, you would remember what you heard, and you would feel like, okay, you were part of this bigger experience instead of just, you know, nowadays, because of social media too, we're so used to listening and looking at 1 minute things or a few seconds. So to actually force people to stay with you for, you know, I used to, before this gig, this album, I did another one called The Meridians, which was a full composition from beginning to end that lasted 1.5 hours, basically.
Beautiful.
And I was really afraid of how people were going to react, but I found that it was easier for them almost because they were not so fidgety, you know, and you could kind of bring them in an easier way and ease them into the story. I don't know.
Yeah, you're captured in it just like you would be in a movie. You want to see what's happening next, where are you taking it?
Yeah.
And Lines in the Sand is available now?
Yeah, it came out earlier this year, and it's about the immigrant experience. You know, I'm an immigrant myself. I'm from Mexico City, born and raised. But, you know, I've been so lucky that I was born to a family that was able to send me to Berklee, to allow me to do what I wanted. So this album is really not about me. This album's about the different kind of immigrant that lately especially is being ostracized, demonized, and politicized by a few, but very powerful people in the name of this, you know, fake and twisted nationalism that I feel is quickly eroding a very important part of the human essence, which is to feel empathy for other people, you know, other human beings. And I feel like this whole thing that has been happening in our country with the immigrants is just a matter of human dignity and decency, you know. And I always try to pose the question, okay, if this was going to ever happen to me, be displaced because of famine, because of violence, because of crime, and I ended up in a different place, how would I want to be treated, you know? And that should lead the way on how we should treat other people, I think.
Through the musical journey of what you're doing on that album.
So you know, it was. I really wanted to make a few points in this album, and I had some poetry in the middle of by these two girls that were 17 at the time. I was writing the main piece, Lines in the Sand, and I was writing this section of the tune. That was the one that is like 26 minutes long, and I always felt like it needed something. I wasn't sure what, and for some reason, I went into YouTube and I looked up immigration poetry. And I saw this amazing clip of these two girls, Carla Gutierrez and Paola Gonzalez, just reciting this incredible piece of poetry that they wrote. And it was very poignant and very strong. And I grabbed it and I chopped it up and I put it on the music, and I got goosebumps immediately. So I thought, okay, I have to reach out to them and ask them if they will let me use it. So I went into Facebook and I left them some messages, and that's when I realized that Facebook now is for old people, because they did not get back to me, but their parents did immediately, and they said, oh, you can reach them on Instagram. So I reached them there and I told them, and they were very happy to let me use the poem. And there's some more interesting bits in the album, but I really wanted to make the point to put the attention not into what the administration is, but in the people that really need the attention.
Is there a movie producer inside Antonio I'm feeling here a little bit, maybe sometime in the future here?
No. I cannot think of anything more stressful than being a movie director.
Stick with
producer.
The music,
Yes,
right.
That's
Speaking of projects, though, as we're filming this for you out there, we're also being filmed by a production crew you have here about a documentary that's going to be on your life coming up, which is very exciting.
I'm super excited about it, and I'm incredibly flattered too, because, you know, I feel like I still have so much much to do. But yeah, it's some friends from Mexico and wanted to start filming part of my life and just make it into a little bit of a documentary, and they're here, and it's really
I'm qualified to say you're just a kid. You got a lot more that you can do. No
I
question.
feel like a kid.
No question about it. Thank you for joining us so much today.
Thank you,
I really, really, really appreciate it.
My
and
pleasure.
everything that's behind us here, talking about music and making music. Check out what we have here for you on Drum Channel. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.